Hello, comrades. Welcome back to Commie Reading Group. Today we'll be continuing um, Socialist Reconstruction. Suko! I haven't seen you in a long time. How you doing? Welcome in. We're just about to start reading. Goodbye. Please do not self-promote on my stream. Alright, here we go. So we left off on life under socialism will be better as everyone will be able to count on free healthcare, education, transportation, unities, low-cost housing, more free time, and deeper engagement in determining our common futures. Adapting to the changing climate requires the reconstruction of the economy along socialist lines. A socialist reconstruction will shift from consumption-oriented commodity production to the production of universal basic services. From fundamentals such as free public transportation and guaranteed housing to conceptions of health and education expanded to encompass mental, sexual, social, and cultural flourishing. A socialist economy takes off from the universal. Oh no, you're right, Seth. A socialist economy takes off from a um, universalize, universalizes the gains capitalist hoards for the few. The goal of a socialist production isn't private profit or capital accumulation. It's advancing the conditions under which people and the planet can thrive. Instead of capital's world and soul destroying drive for more money, more commodities, and more accumulation, the motive force of socialist planning will be developing the forms of association that reproduce a flourishing social and eco- ecological world. Socialism is possible and necessary. In the US, we already have the capacity to solve a wide array of social problems. Highly developed logistics systems, such as Amazon's, can be directed towards the elimination of hunger, with food and other necessities being distributed as needed. The elaborate databases used by real estate companies like Zillow can be destroyed to connect houses with potential occupants, enabling us to eradicate the racist legacy of redlining and guarantee secure, comfortable, and attractive housing to all. The practices and infrastructure necessary for socialist planning are already in place, but they are in the wrong hands, the hands of the class of owners instead of the class of workers. Most contemporary socialists in the US agree with the imperative of ending exploitation and special oppression. They share the goals of providing everyone with reliable access to quality healthcare, education, and housing. Programs like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, and movements to abolish debt and racist policing have grown in popularity because they articulate real popular demand for systematic change. This book proceeds from the conviction that these demands are realizable here and now. They aren't just a dream. Socialist Reconstruction will make them a reality. What is necessary to make Socialist Reconstruction a reality is working class power. If power over the state and economy is not in the hands of the multinational working class, then we will be forever fighting for consciousness that the ruling class will do its best to retract. We won't be able to move forward because we will constantly have to defend what we've already won. The capitalists and landlords will continue to invent new ways to keep us distracted, indebted, divided, and insecure, and we will not end up forced to acquiesce to ongoing exploitation and oppression. But the crises of capitalism can't be addressed piecemeal. They are all related. Because U.S. Social Democrats and Democratic Socialists focus on small gains while leaving the underlying system in place. They don't seem to believe their own program. For them, socialism is the music of a distant future. Along with millions of others across the country and around the world, we hear the music now and believe we should all join in playing it. The following chapter shows what the first decade of socialism could be like in the US. How is it possible, and why it will create a better future for people and the planet. Anchored in appreciation of all workers as unique human beings, our vision replaces capitalism's market determination of value via exchange with socialist values of meaningful, unalienated work and expand free time. Workers are not line items on basic balance sheets, although that's what capitalists reduce us to. Workers are unique human beings with hopes, needs, talents, and relationships that must be supported and cultivated. All labor that is necessary for society to function and achieve our collective goals will be recognized as meaningful, thereby overcoming alienation. Forms of labor that are currently seen as less desirable can be better distributed, more widely respected, and better compensated so that the burdens of such labor and are socialized rather than faceted onto specific social groups who are underpaid and degraded. The only way to eliminate structural racism and sexism is by challenging the structures. When different forms of labor are shared, people learn to see and appreciate them, to understand, for example, where our food comes from, and participate in growing, preparing, and serving it. When everyone has a say in planning what needs to be done, and when everyone does our part in carrying it out, we all learn to respect the work that goes into reproducing our society and meeting our needs. We also all get more time to pursue the things we love, as well as more time off. Meaningful work and more free time. In his classic account, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, Engels presents the determining factor in history as the production and reproduction of immediate life. As Engels explains, production involves making and securing means of existence such as shelter, food, clothing, and tools. Reproduction involves the propagation of the species. That is the work of caring for children and maintaining community relations. Throughout history, the organization of production and reproduction changes. In fact, history can be understood in terms of these changes. Important for our analysis, here is the way that productive work becomes became subject to wages with the development of industrial capitalism and capitalist agriculture. Instead of taking the proce- proceeds of workers' labor by brutal force, although this still happens, capitalists purchase the labor power of workers from a period of time. The price, the length, and condition of labor are always a matter of class struggle. Labor under capitalism is alienated for the profit of another, the capitalist, and distributed via the market, which means the capitalists want to buy it as cheaply as possible. The, the system is so twisted and unjust that some of the hardest and most necessary jobs receive the least compensation and respect. The risk of industrial capitalism also impacted reproductive labor. The domestic sphere ceases to be a site for the production of basic goods like cloth, soap, candles, and canned goods. These become these become industrially produced commodities. Since the care work associated with rearing children and tending a household held no immediate value in capitalist markets, women's position, vice vice versa, men was devalued. A cult of domesticity, domesticity, domestic, domesticacy reduced women's roles to those of wife and mother. The working class, women, and enslaved women always worked for others outside their own households, often in grueling jobs requiring great strength and long hours, reveals the contradictory nature of the ideology that a woman's place is in the home. As a formerly enslaved worker, abolitionist, and women's rights activist, Sojourner Truth famously said, "Ain't I a woman?" Oriented towards a private accumulation of capital, the capitalist system undervalues or devalues most of the labor essential to the production and reproduction of life. From the standpoint of the capitalist, our labor is nothing more than an input into the process through which they make their money. In contrast, socialism recognizes and values as meaningful the work of producing and reproducing our social world. In a socialist U.S., most people will engage in both kinds of work, ending annihilation and devaluation of reproductive labor. Under socialism, productive work will be meaningful and unalienated because it will result from planning. That is, from collective discussion of values, properties, and goals. People will understand work as contributing to larger social aims, such as the provision of healthy food, repair of vital infrastructure, regeneration of land and water, education of children, and enrichment of cultural life. The very experience of work will change as people have more control over their working conditions. Reproductive work will be recognized as occurring as multiple levels, caring for children and others in our households and families of choice, tending to relationships in our community, and organizing and planning our common life. Here, too, planning will affect a revaluation of emotional labor. The fact that we are always connected with others who depend on us and on whom we depend is featured in the ways we organize and socialize the tasks of everyday life. From the length of the workday or work week to the provisions for infant and child care to the cultivation of voluntary associations and the creation of new social forms under socialism, reproductive labor will be championed as essential and meaningful work. Like meaningful work, expanded free time, time to do with what we will, is a key component of the vision of socialism developed in this book. Workers, feminists, and environmentalists have constantly advocated for shorter working days and weeks. The labor movement brought us the 8-hour day. Shorter working days enable greater work-life balance, diminishing pressure on parents in the labor force, and improving physical and mental health. Reductions in labor time have environmental benefits as they led to decrease in carbon emissions and energy demands. Advances in technology and automation should have already led to shorter workdays, a shorter work week, and months of paid vacations. In some European countries, the efforts of labor unions and social democratic practices have secured these benefits for many workers. This has not been the case in the United States, largely due to the particular ferociousness of the U.S. capitalist class and its attack on anything that smelled of socialism. Because automation is developed under capitalist control, it hurts U.S. workers more than it helps us. Exploitation and unemployment increases as some workers labor longer and longer hours, and others don't work at all. Instead of more free time for everyone, the result of capitalist automation has been a larger reserve army of the unemployment and a smaller but overworked labor force. The dirty secret of the technology sector is that it runs on a far fewer workers that the industrial economy required. Socialist planning will eliminate this contradictory and unfair approach to work. The benefits of automation will be extended to all workers, decrease the amount of labor time necessary for the production of goods and services. At the same time, the priority of involving everyone in production for the good of all, of letting everyone share in meaningful work, will have the happy effect of increasing the amount of time available for us to do with what we will. A better future under socialism. A socialist reconstruction is possible in the United States, here and now. The technological and scientific means of production have advanced beyond what was scarcely imaginable 100 years ago. The problem is that they are confined within capitalist properties relations. They are conceived as private property owned by the few. The very idea that a company or corporation is private property conceals its relationship to all sorts of or corporation of its relationships to all sorts of people, practices, and resources outside its legal scope. For example, a company like Amazon relies on public goods and services like the U.S. Postal Service, roads, and the Internet. It, it presupposes that someone has paid to educate the people who come to be its employees. It also depends on someone somewhere finding something to do with all the boxes, packed materials, trash, and envelopes in its service guarantees. What economists refer to as externalities, for which the company doesn't pay but which has cost nevertheless. To use another example, Pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and Moderna receive billions of dollars in public funding to develop coronavirus vaccines. Yet they pay, patent the vaccines, claimed it as their own private property. Not only what is clearly vital to the global common good, but what was paid for by the tax dollars of working people. Relying on public money to fund private capital accumulation is standard operating procedure under capitalism. Risk is socialized and reward is privatized. The next and necessary step is to socialize rewards so that everyone benefits, not just the few. And this means abolishing the legal form of private property that distorts collective ventures and socially produced knowledge into means of private capital accumulation. A socialist reconstruction is possible in the United States, here and now. Across the United States, interest in socialism is growing. People may not know exactly what it means, but most recognize it as the answer to the problems capitalism poses and cannot solve. The vision of socialist reconstruction presents here supplies a framework that demonstrates how socialism enables us to get beyond the contradictions of capitalism by decarbonizing and deprivatizing the economy and by reorienting production around universal basic services, meaningful work, and greater time to do with what we will. We have reached Chapter 1, Socialism in the United States, the Socialist Revival. Socialism is making a comeback in the United States. The statement presented by one of the speakers at the 2016 conference in Los Angeles, attended mainly by very young, working class socialists, might have seemed belittling to many in the crowd. It would likely be belittling to many of their parents. This is chapter 1, Seth. We just got done reading the introduction. Come back from what and from when? The statement implies that socialism was once popular in America. If the older parents of young conference attendees had lived their lives in the United States, most would have no such memory of socialism ever being popular. The memory of socialism and its immense contribution to progressive struggles for social and economic rights inside the United States was essentially extinguished, or so horribly distorted for the 6 decades after the end of World War II, that very few people alive today have any awareness of socialism's rule in U.S. history. For decades, socialists have to hide their views or they were in big trouble. Albert Einstein, the world's most renewed physicist, was a socialist. In 1949, he published Why Socialism, a thoughtful and impassioned explanation of why society needs to be organized along socialist lines. Einstein thought that the chief problem with capitalism is that it fosters competition rather than cooperation between people. J. Edward Hoover, the head of the FBI, ordered agents to carry out a massive spying operation against Einstein. The surveillance of every aspect of his life resulted in an FBI file that was 800 pages long. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was also a socialist. We celebrate his birthday every year as a result for a long and hard-fought struggle of civil rights movement. Ironically, it was right-wing Republican President Ronald Reagan who signed the law declaring the third Monday in January a federal holiday. Almost no one in the country knows that Dr. King was a socialist. It is never discussed. I imagine you already know that I am much more socialist in my economic theory than capitalistic. A 23-year-old King wrote to his then girlfriend and later wife, Coretta Scott King. And yet I am not so opposed to capitalism that I have failed to see its relative merits. It started out with a noble and high motive to block the trade monopolies of nobles. But like most human systems, it fell victim to very... Where was I? It started out with a noble, high motive to block the trade monopolies of nobles. But like most human systems, it fell victim of the very thing it was revolting against. So today's capitalism has outlived its usefulness. King's letter to Coretta was written in July 1952, 3 years before the Montgomery bus boycott, which he helped lead, launched the modern civil rights movement. In this personal love letter, King continues, "It is possibly true that capitalism is on its deathbed, but social symptoms have a way of developing a long and powerful deathbed breathing capacity. Remember, it took feudalism more than 500 years to pass out from its deathbed. Capitalism will be in America quite a few more years, my dear." He continues. Our economic system is going through a radical change, and certainly this change is needed. I would certainly welcome the day to come when there will be a nationalization of industry. Let us continue to hope, work, and pray that in the future we will live to see a warless world, a better distribution of wealth, and a brotherhood that transcends race or color. This is the gospel that I will preach to the world. King's comments about socialism and the future of capitalism in this letter resulted from his reading of Edward Bellamy's utopian socialist book, Looking Backwards, published in 1887. Coretta gave him the book. She obviously liked it a great deal, and she wanted to find out his views on socialism. King writes, "At this point, I must thank you a million times for introducing me to such a stimulating book. You are sweet and thoughtful. You are sweet and thoughtful indeed." The letter also indicates that King was familiar with Karl Marx. He read at least some of his works and agreed with a well-known Marxist theme. I have learned from reading Marx in a book like Bellamy's, and that is that religion so easily became a tool of the middle class to keep the proletariat oppressed. King's expression of anti-capitalism was more than an effort to impress his pro-socialist girlfriend. 9 years after his 1952 letter to Coretta, he gave a speech to the NALC, which is, I'm going to say, Black American Labor Council, where he stated, "Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. But there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children." In April 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated, he was in the middle of organizing the Poor People's March, a permanent encampment in Washington, D.C. In the months prior to the march, he focused almost entirely on calling for a radical recognition of the economy. As he said in a speech at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference held, held in Atlanta on August 16th, 1967, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Dr. King had to be very cautious about his comments. The FBI was waging a war against socialism and the civil rights movement. Hoover conflated socialism and communism with the movement of equality for black Americans. Dr. King, like Einstein, was the victim of a mass spying operation. King knew that if he became too identified as a socialist, he would be isolated and perhaps destroyed. That's what had happened to renewed artist and actor Paul Robeson, who had, who had been stripped of his passport in 1950. It happened as well to Ben Davis, a member of the Communist Party elected to the New York City Council in 1943. In 1949, Davis was convicted and sent to prison for 5 years for violating the Smith Act, which criminalized affiliation with any organization that advocated the overthrow of the U.S. government. What was his crime? He was a Marxist and a communist. Only the Soviet Union escaped the Great Depression during the 1930s. While the major capitalist economies saw tens of millions of workers suddenly lose employment, the unemployment rate in the U.S. was 25% in 1932. The planned economy in the USSR experienced massive growth. Canceling socialism. These days, there is a lot of controversy around cancel culture. Fierce debates rage across both right and left. What is acceptable discourse? Do individuals, groups, and institutions have the right to condemn or silence those they think have crossed a line and said something unacceptable? Can or should the government publicly fund universities or social media platforms impose their own restrictions on on free expression? What's been missing from these debates is recognition of the ruling class's long history of censorship and blacklisting. With the onset of the Cold War in 1946, socialism and communism were systematically canceled in U.S. society. With hundreds of millions of people outside of the United States while hundreds of millions of people outside the United States embraced socialism, engaged in critiques of this, or that trend within socialism, and joined socialist organizations, socialist parties, and socialist-led trade unions. People living in the United States were basically barred from participating in socialism's global movement for economic and social justice. The cancellation of socialists and communists was universally accepted and enforced by all sectors of the U.S. capitalist establishment. In politics, business, entertainment, culture, sports, education, and especially in the capitalist-owned free press. After World War II, the world was divided into two great political camps. Which was the way forward for humanity? Socialism or capitalism? No question was more polarizing, more debated. After two consecutive global wars waged by cons- consecutive generations, wars that took the lives of more than 100 million people, the issue posed by society was how to end the surge of regular, intensifying global confidence, aptly dubbed aptly dubbed world wars. The second of these great wars followed a decade of economic depression that was unlike anything the world has seen. Only the Soviet Union escaped the Great Depression during the 1930s, while the major capitalist economies saw tens of millions of workers suddenly lose employment. The unemployment rate in the US was 25% in 1932. The planned economy in the USSR experienced massive growth. There was no unemployment. The biggest problem was a labor shortage. As with the phenomenon of World War, the massive economic depression raised fundamental questions. Were war and depression unavoidable features of capitalism? Were there an alternative system? Was there an alternative system? Could socialism work? The American people were excluded from this great debate about the future. The irony is that the US government takes pride in guaranteeing free speech as a basic right. Being able to speak one's mind and express one's opinion is taken as a fundamental to a free society. The story of free speech is ingrained as quintessentially American that most people assume it to be true. It's not. It reveals itself as a fairy tale when one considers what happened to people identified as socialists, communists, or Marxists. They were sent to prison, lost their jobs and careers, and endorsed social demonization and isolation. Actors, directors, and screenwriters were driven from Hollywood. Teachers and educators were either blocked from professional careers or purged from schools and universities. The capitalist class and the government's repressive force purged the United States of one of its most robust social and political movements. People in the U.S. were taught to hate and fear socialism. This fear and hate drove a modern-day witch hunt. Anti-communism and anti-socialism became a sweeping crusade, practically a national religion. Socialism was bad and communism was worse. Their evilness came to be accepted as an article of faith. Once demonized and shunned by society, usually with ample help from the FBI, the only way socialists can be rehabilitated was if they confessed, renounced their former socialist friends and comrades, and denounced socialism as an evil that they unwittingly subscribed to when they were young and naive. Individuals applying for jobs had to swear on their application forms that they were not communists. The government confronted leaders of many of the most important labor unions with a stark choice. Either renounce your socialist and communist beliefs and hand over the names of your socialist coworkers, or lose your position in the labor movement. Some suffered the consequence of staying true to their convictions. Many captivated to the crusade that seemed too big to be defeated by any single individual act of resistance. America's crusade against socialism was publicly launched by demographic politicians in Congress. The FBI, as well as state and local police departments in all 50 states, played the role of the secret police. They spied on well-known people such as Einstein, Dr. King, and Helen Keller. And they spied on hundreds of thousands of everyday people suspected of having communist and socialist sympathies. Convincing employees to fire them landlords to evict them, and labor unions to expel them. And an army of uncover FBI agents and informants infiltrated socialist groups, civil rights organizations, peace movements, and progressive cultural organizations. Operatives took down the names and license plates of attendees at progressive demonstrations for peace or civil rights. They shared this information with local police departments, employers, landlords, and religious institutions. They kept files and wrecked lives. Socialism and communism was conflated with the socialist government in Moscow at a time when the US was actively preparing for war against the Soviet Union. This would be the Third World War. The first ended in 1918. More than 20 million people were killed in less than 4 hours. The second ended in 1945, about 80 million having died within just a few years. The Third World War would be even worse because of the enemy. The communists in Moscow had also built thermonuclear weapons. In the common nuclear confrontation between communism and democracy, the US would likely suffer mass civilian casualties. School children endured endless drills to prepare for the coming nuclear attack, as if ducking under desks and covering their heads could save them from any atomic blast. Suburban middle-class families built bomb shelters in their backyards. The country was wiped into a frenzy, not only against communists in the Soviet Union, but also against socialists and communists in the U.S. They were portrayed as domestic fifth column, ideologically loyal to the communist enemy. The systematic effort of the capitalist class and repressive state government expelled the socialist and communist left from U.S. political discourse. Speech associated with socialism became too dangerous to exercise, which meant it wasn't free at all. Socialists learned to self-censor, to camouflage their ideas with vague terms like progressive and social justice. Socialists owned self-censorship, rounded out of the official suppression of socialist thought in the United States. While the country patted itself on the back for being the bastion of individual rights and free speech. This long dismissal era of socialist repression and self-repression is coming to an end. A robust exploration of socialism is replacing it. New support for socialist ideas and the creations of an alternative system to U.S. capitalism is emerging across the country. People want to reclaim control of the economy from the billionaires, ultra-rich bankers, and corrupt capitalists. They want to see an economic system reconstructed with measures that will immediately improve the lives of the vast majority of the people, especially the hard-pressed working class and poor. Socialism is experiencing a revival. Capitalist cries are awakening ever-growing numbers of working people to the need for change. They're like